Surviving a medieval winter was not merely a matter of discomfort. It was a yearly trial that tested human endurance, ingenuity, and social bonds. For people living between roughly the 10th and 15th centuries, winter arrived without warning systems, central heating, or modern medicine. Cold could kill as surely as war or plague. Yet medieval communities developed practical, often surprisingly effective strategies to endure months of darkness, freezing temperatures, and food scarcity. Clothing, heating, and food preservation formed a fragile but vital triangle of survival, shaped by geography, class, and tradition. Clothing was the first and most visible line of defense against the cold. Medieval garments were designed less for fashion and more for insulation and durability. Wool was the dominant fabric across Europe, prized for its ability to retain warmth even when damp. Unlike cotton, wool fibers trap air, creating a natural barrier against cold winds. Peasants, townsfolk, and even nobles relied heavily on layered wool garments, often worn continuously throughout winter. Linen, usually worn underneath, absorbed sweat and protected the skin, while heavier woolen tunics, gowns, or cloaks were layered on top. Fur played a critical role, particularly in colder regions and among those who could afford it. Rabbit, fox, sheepskin, and squirrel fur lined cloaks, hoods, and gloves. Contrary to popular belief, fur was not exclusively aristocratic. Many rural people used animal skins from their own livestock or hunts. Sheepskin coats, worn with the wool facing inward, were common among shepherds and farmers. These garments were bulky and heavy, but they could mean the difference between life and death during long hours outdoors. Headwear was especially important, as heat loss through the head could be severe. Hoods, coifs, caps, and felt hats were worn almost constantly. The medieval hood, often extending into a long, tail-like liripipe, covered the head, neck, and shoulders, sealing warmth where it was most needed. Gloves and mittens, often knitted or made of leather lined with wool or fur, protected hands that were still expected to work even in freezing weather. Footwear posed a greater challenge. Weather shoes offered little insulation, so people stuffed them with straw, hay, or wool scraps. Some wore wooden overshoes or clogs to keep feet dry and lifted above snow or mud. Despite these efforts, clothing alone could not fully protect against winter's cold, making heating essential. The medieval home was built around fire. Hearths were the primary source of warmth, light, and cooking heat. In peasant cottages, the hearth often sat in the centre of a single-room dwelling, with smoke escaping through a hole in the roof, or simply drifting out through gaps in thatch and walls. These smoky interiors were unpleasant and dangerous, but the constant fire was necessary for survival. In towns and wealthier homes, fireplaces became more sophisticated. Stone or brick hearths built into walls allowed better control of smoke through chimneys, though these were still inefficient by modern standards. Heat rarely travelled far from the fire itself. Rooms remained cold, and people clustered close to the hearth, especially at night. Large households often slept together in one room during winter, not only for warmth, but also for safety and practicality. Fuel was precious. Wood was the most common source, but its availability varied. In forested regions, firewood could be gathered, though laws often restricted who could legally collect it. In areas where wood was scarce, people burned peat, dried animal dung, or even straw. Charcoal was used by artisans and wealthier households because it burned hotter and cleaner, but it required time and resources to produce. Managing fuel supplies was a constant concern. Running out in midwinter could be fatal. Medieval architecture itself reflected the need to conserve heat. Homes were small, with low ceilings to trap warmth. Windows were tiny and often covered with oiled cloth, parchment, or wooden shutters rather than glass. Thick stone or wattle and daub walls provided some insulation, though they also retained cold. Floors were usually packed earth, sometimes strewn with straw or rushes that added minimal insulation but helped keep feet off damp ground. Tapestries and heavy wall hangings in wealthier homes served not only decorative purposes, but also helped reduce drafts. If clothing and heating kept people alive day to day, food preservation determined whether they would survive the entire season. Winter meant the near total absence of fresh produce. Success depended on how well food had been stored during the warmer months. Preservation techniques were deeply embedded in medieval life, and much of the year's labour revolved around preparing for winter. Salting was one of the most widespread methods of preserving meat and fish. Pork, beef and mutton were heavily salted and stored in barrels. Salt drew moisture out of the meat, inhibiting bacterial growth. Salted food could last months, though it became extremely hard and required soaking before cooking. Fish, particularly herring and cod, were preserved in vast quantities, supporting inland populations far from the sea. These salted foods were filling and nutritious, but monotonous, contributing to the dull, repetitive winter diet. Smoking was another crucial technique. Meat and fish were hung in smokehouses or over hearths, where smoke both dried the food and infused it with preservative compounds. Smoked bacon, ham, and sausages were staples of winter meals. Drying extended beyond meat. Fruits such as apples, pears, and plums were sliced and dried, either in the sun or near fires. These dried fruits provided rare sweetness and vitamins during the bleak months. Pickling and fermentation added variety and nutritional value. Cabbage, turnips, and other vegetables were fermented into forms similar to sauerkraut. These foods not only lasted through winter, but also helped prevent deficiencies such as scurvy. Ale and beer were also products of preservation. Brewing converted grain into a drink that was safer than water and provided calories and warmth. Weak ale was consumed daily by all ages, especially in winter when water sources could freeze or become contaminated. Grain storage was perhaps the most critical factor of all. Bread formed the backbone of the medieval diet. Wheat, rye, barley, and oats were harvested in late summer and stored in granaries, often raised off the ground to deter moisture and rodents. Poor harvests could spell disaster months later. A harsh winter following a bad harvest led directly to famine. People stretched supplies by mixing grains, adding legumes, or bulking bread with peas and beans. Winter food was dense and designed to sustain energy rather than pleasure. Stews and pottages dominated meals, combining grains, preserved meat vegetables, and whatever herbs were available. These dishes could simmer for hours near the hearth, making efficient use of limited fuel. Spices, when available, improved flavor and were believed to aid digestion and warmth, though they were expensive and mainly accessible to the wealthy. Beyond the physical challenges, surviving a medieval winter was also a social and psychological experience. Communal living helped distribute warmth and resources. Neighbors shared labor, fuel, and sometimes food. Religious festivals, such as Christmas and midwinter feasts, provided brief relief from hardship, reinforcing social bonds and offering emotional comfort during the darkest days of the year. Storytelling, prayer, and simple games filled long winter evenings, helping people endure isolation and cold. Yet winter remained dangerous. Illness spread easily in cold, smoky interiors. Malnutrition weakened immune systems. The elderly and very young were especially vulnerable. A single storm could isolate villages, while prolonged cold could kill livestock, undermining future survival. Medieval people understood that winter was not an enemy to conquer, but a force to endure, year after year, with preparation and resilience. Surviving a medieval winter was an exercise in balance. Clothing insulated fragile human bodies. Heating offered a small island of warmth against overwhelming cold, and preserved food bridged the gap between harvests. None of these solutions were perfect, and all required constant labor and foresight. Each winter survived was a quiet victory, earned through preparation, shared effort, and the stubborn refusal to let the cold win.